Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Telebehavioral Health Services, Planning and Investing for the Future of Your Services. This is our fifth session in the series, and this session is what behavioral health and digital mental health infrastructure to build now and what can be built later with Jay Ostrowski from Behavioral Health Innovations. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeastern Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, and we're housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Kathy, and I'm the project coordinator of the center, and we'll be hosting this webinar today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. Please visit the MHTTC Network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. Next slide, please. And, oh, I think you have to go back one. Oh, I think I was wrong. Next one, please. During this webinar, our presenter may interact with you. We ask you to either use the chat box, or you can also use the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you'd like to ask Jay during the Q&A portion. He might also engage with you and ask you to enter your responses in the chat box. So we thank you in advance for your participation. Next slide, please. If you're interested in staying up to date with the events and products the Northeastern Caribbean MHTTC is providing, we ask that you please sign up to receive our email communications. You can sign up at the bit.ly link provided on the screen, and I will also share this link in the chat box for you. Following the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. We value this feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform our future activities. These surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of them, so we thank you in advance for your feedback. Slide, please. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website along with the PDF version of our presenter slides in the next few days. Next slide, please. This presentation was prepared for the Northeastern Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. All material appearing in this presentation, except that taken directly from copyrighted sources, is in the public domain and may be reproduced or copied without permission from SAMHSA or the authors. Citation of the source is appreciated. Do not reproduce or copy or distribute this presentation for a fee without specific written authorization from the Northeastern Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. This presentation will be recorded and posted on our website. At the time of this presentation, Tom Codier served as Acting Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS, SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. Next slide, please. The MHTTC uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. This includes language that is strength-based and hopeful, language that is inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, language that is healing-centered and trauma-responsive, language that invites individuals to participate in their own recovery journey, language that is person first and free of labels, language that is non-judgmental and avoids assumptions, and language that is respectful, clear, and understandable and consistent with our actions, policies, and products. Next slide, please. Now let's begin our webinar. We have Jay Ostrowski with us today. Jay is the CEO of Behavioral Health Innovation, where he develops and deploys telemental health, telebehavioral health, and telemet programs and designs HIPAA secure software applications such as adaptive telehealth. He also serves as a telehealth consultant and implementation partner for the Mid-Atlantic Telehealth Resource Center and is the director of the Telebehavioral Health Center of Excellence. So again, I want to welcome everyone today, and I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us again in this series. We have this one and one more left, and we're excited to be bringing you some content that will be really relevant to your purchasing and rollout in this seminar and the next one. We have previous seminars, if you haven't listened to them yet, that have a lot of content as well. We're kind of layering things here, so we're going to review a little bit on some things and add more layers as we go and more complexity to it. My background is as a licensed counselor, licensed supervisor. I've been working in telehealth for about 20 years. I've also been working in the field for about 30 years, to hint at my age. I've had my own private practice clinics. I started one in a church nursery and grew it to be 4 locations and about 30 W2 staff. And then I managed a 28 clinic network. I've worked inpatient, outpatient, group homes, and telehealth. And so I'm pretty familiar with the ins and outs of the operations as both a clinician and a manager and creator, owner of these programs. So I'll be talking from that perspective on what's needed, and some of that experience will come out as we talk. My journey started quite a long time ago, and things have evolved quite a lot. As we're recording this, we're not sure who's attending this, so I want to make this a broad-based yet practical seminar. So we will be touching on what's needed for larger and smaller organizations. And of course, we'll be talking idealistically in some cases and just real pragmatically in other cases. And I think that'll be pretty obvious as we go along. So the topic today is what telebehavioral health and digital mental health infrastructure to build now and build later. So as part of this building process or decision-making, it's really important for you to know a lot of the background of what's going to be needed. The biggest mistake you can make in starting your program is to buy your technology first. And somebody's listening to this going, oops. You can recover, of course, from that. But once you purchase your technology, you're picking a path. And that path will have opportunities and limitations. And so what we want to do today is kind of caution you on what to buy and what to build, so that you're aware of what the consequences are, good and bad. So what I'd like to do is give you kind of that backdrop of things you need to know in order to make those good decisions. So it will be imperative for you to kind of understand some of the background issues. So with that, the objectives, of course, I always like to start with why. I think why is super important. Why you should invest, and what you should invest in, and why, and understanding some things that you should not invest in my view. So we're going to cover a lot of ground to get you to understand these technical needs, but I'm also looking to help you prevent some known problems, because if you focus too much on the technology, you will miss what really works, and your program will likely fail. So we're doing kind of failure prevention today by telling you which directions to go in. So let me back up. So does it make sense? The why? What does it make sense to build and scale in telehealth? As you can see on the slide, there's quite a lot going on, a lot of investment, and the market size has continued to grow and projected to grow quite a lot more. So 2019, they projected about 21 billion was invested in the telehealth market, and they're expecting 8 years later for it to be 71 billion. This was before the pandemic. So a lot has has changed, as you can imagine, because of the pandemic and the need. So we have found that from other surveys that telehealth, telemental health, telebehavioral health is here to stay. And even though, as clinicians, we actually prefer, most of us, to see people in person, there's quite a bit of market demand for online services on a continued basis. So the trend line is for most practices to have some lines of service, and some services 100% online, or have providers see some people online and some people offline or in person, depending on the days of the week or the services they're providing. But we found, evidence is very strong that it is as effective as in-person care. And there are no contraindications, as we talked about in previous webinars. So I think if you don't invest in telehealth, in telemental health services, you're going to be left behind. And it will be the case that other companies that are doing things more efficiently, more effectively through technology will come in and chip away at your market. You might say, well, I'm a community mental health service, and that actually won't protect you because the government can outsource some of your services to these other services if the price is right, or if they have more capabilities. And we're going to talk about some of that. You do have quite a lot more options if you are using technology. So we want to talk about what's needed to get you in the right place for that. And then again, not to invest in the wrong things. Also, you'll have more opportunities to grow and to pivot and change as you need to if you have some investments in technology and understanding of what you should and shouldn't invest in. The revenue from technology, from telehealth through technology is going through a sea change. There are, a lot of things happening. Let me just go to that slide and tell you a little bit more about that. So we have demographic shifts, as you guys already know, that are adapting to technology. There's quite a few people that are using the internet, like 93% of people using the internet through smartphones. We have even older populations. I know, parents and grandparents are now seeing people through apps, through Skype, through their phones to see people, especially in the pandemic. So there's kind of a acculturation of people using technology, and people are expecting that you'll be able to do that, or they'll be looking for services that will do that. There are 133 million people with chronic illnesses. Some of these are chronic mental health illnesses. There's also quite a good research and growing understanding that integrated behavioral health is essential to health. Mental health is health. And if your mental health is not good, you're not going to be taking your blood pressure, or you're eating right, or exercising, doing all the things that keep your body healthy. So there's a lot of grant money out there right now, and a lot of programs focusing on integrated behavioral health. And technology is an easier, scalable way to integrate with primary care docs and internists and other specialists. So there is a large movement that's been building momentum over the past 10 years to kind of connect different providers together in patient home scenarios and referral networks, lots of different services where we're blending the physical and mental health, making referrals easier. And it's really technology is that hub of the wheel. So it's no longer just your own private EHR anymore, or your own medical records. It's your technology becomes your office. And it actually is feasible now to have an 100% office online. There are plenty of referrals for that, and logistics do work for that if you know how to set them up and run them. But it is feasible. It's different if you've never done that before, but it's feasible. I've been running an online office for about 8 years, 100%, seeing all my clients that way. And I know, and I've helped many other people do that too. So it's quite possible. There are also national networks that you can join or be a part of or gain referrals from. But you have to have that technology infrastructure, or you'll be passed over for somebody that already does. But the other part of that is it's going to be the staffing part, and we'll come back to that in a minute, how to prepare your company for this. And then there's a lot of legislation that is being put forth and moving through the whole legislative cycles, where they are solidifying and codifying reimbursement for telehealth services, and telemental health, telebehavioral health being a very big part of that. Telemental health and telebehavioral health are still the largest portions of services used in the whole telehealth array. So when we talk about telehealth, know that of the whole pie dividing up, what services are done, a good 2/3 of that is still mental health and behavioral health services. So that's across the board, across the entire country, and actually growing around the world. There's also a growing acceptance among patients and providers because of this exposure to telemental health. And before the pandemic, it was a little uphill climb to get people to try it. and saying, oh, I'd never do that. And then, necessity was the mother invention. They decided to discover telehealth and have had good experiences now. Some, or actually most, are planning to continue services now that they've had a taste of that online. And now it's a matter of configuration and doing that in a HIPAA secure manner. And also an essential part of this is making it more efficient and compliant at the same time. And we're going to talk about some of those needs as you're looking at what to buy and what to scale and what to build. So the bottom line, I'm kind of a bottom line person, so I wanted to put the bottom line up front for you. They used to call it bluff, bottom line up front. So the bottom line for your future growth is this. You need to buy technology and buy into technology that has options, because technology is changing really, really rapidly. The things that were not possible 2 years ago are now possible. And things are rapidly growing. One of the programs we're doing is measuring emotions with artificial intelligence. So we could do that through facial recognition, identify different emotions and respond to them through AI and through software. That didn't seem feasible a few years ago, but now with computing power and advances in artificial intelligence, that is rapidly growing and finding new applications for it. Different apps are now able to handle much more transactions, and chatbots we're creating that are able to interact much like a human interaction. You might be familiar with really bad chatbots, but the majority of live chatbots now, or chats that you encounter online, the majority of them are now just automated bots going back and forth, but they sound human. They even put in little hiccups and typos to make you think that they're human. But for the most part, they are automated. And they even put pauses in there to make it look like it's someone thinking about what they're saying. How do we know this? Because I'm one of the people making them, that's why. And we make and deploy those things for lots of different companies. So we also need to understand that we need these options, because the services that you're going to need in 2 or 4 years may be very different than the ones that you're doing now. So it's mental health counseling, it's assessment, it's medication assessment, medication management, maybe some consultations, maybe it's case management. All of those are the same kind of work, but the way we do that work is rapidly changing. And the reimbursement of that work is also changing as well. And the laws and requirements and best practices, all of these are rapidly growing. So other companies around you are deploying these things and experimenting with them, and we don't actually be left behind. So you need the options. You need the technology that will have the options for you. The next thing is you need to be able to integrate with other softwares. You need the data that's in your systems to flow into other systems with, of course, the adequate permissions and in a HIPAA secure way. So to obviously put those caveats in there, but it's really important for you to be able to integrate and then scale. So you don't want all your people to have to log into a physical computer at your location. Your options expand and operationally and clinically, and your costs reduce when you have a distributed team. So you'll need to think about and accommodate that into what you're buying. You need that distribution. And then you need to be validating some of the assumptions that you have about technology. And some of them seem pretty basic, that we need a unit here for every person, or we need to mail out a unit, a computer to everybody. Those assumptions may not be true anymore with BYOD, or bring your own device. There are capabilities where we can now lock down remote devices or lock down logins and secure our data in a cloud or other places that are a local server. So there are a lot of options, and we want to validate our assumptions so that we don't get locked into something that will age very quickly. And then we need to train our staff, and we're going to come back to that quite a bit. And then we get a plan to pivot. So the thing that you're planning now may be outdated in a few years. I hate to say that, but it's may be true, depending on what you're contemplating. So if you need to be building for your next line of services, not your previous lines of service, just like we train soldiers for the next war, not the last war, because the war of the future will be quite different than the wars of the past. We literally are using laser guns and tracking people with drones and things like that, that were not seen in past wars. Same thing with our future services. We need to be thinking about and creating for those future services that actually haven't happened yet. So how do we keep our platform kind of open and our technology open for that? And then we need this continuous feedback and continuous improvement. Some of that is technologically based. Can you get the data you need from your software to tell you about usability and what's working, what's not working? So that's part of your buying or building or leasing decision. But also the human part of this is that process of both training and deploying continuous improvement. So you have the now and you have the then. And there's a scary middle where you are holding on to one trapeze and you let go to grab the next trapeze. That's how I describe this middle ground between the now and the then. Sometimes it's hard to let go of what we already have because it's securely in our hand. And we need to try to grab onto the next trapeze before we let go of the last trapeze. To me, that's the process of experimentation. When you have more of this waterfall approach, it's really difficult to predict what you will need or all the flexibility you will need in the future. So we need to have an agile approach where we're experimenting and validating what we need as we move on. So you want to do these experiments. So providing a handful of telemental health visits through video or text or phone is not difficult on its own. When you've done this kind of a series of one-offs with Zoom or something like that, the difficult part is creating a sustainable and scalable system that will interact with others in a HIPAA secure way and be efficient part of your daily operations. So when you continue to think of it as a one-off, that's where your costs increase. That's where your workflows overall erode. It's an inevitable atrophy, basically, and they become less secure and basically abandoned over time because they're not part of your day-to-day conversations. And some of this is operational and some of this is technical. So if you're answering the phone and you're not asking the client if they'd like an online appointment or an in-person appointment every time, then your default is probably to in-person. And you're basically over time, everybody just forgets about all the investments you made. So some of this is just operational things that you'll need to put in place. And some of them are the technical part. So that could be part of your technical workflow where your admin is forced to make a decision and select one or the other. Or maybe you have an online appointment system that's integrated with your other calendars where all the business rules that you would have for how you make decisions about your calendar are put online and patients can select their own appointments and schedule their appointments and make those choices, whether it's in person or online. These different configurations and customizations, these have been solved many times over. So you need to think, do I want that kind of thing conditioned upon solving all the problems and all the concerns that I have, of course. So that needs to be part of your infrastructure decision-making where you're planning for those eventualities and likelihoods. Your competitors are doing online patient scheduling, self-scheduling, integrated with the provider's self-scheduling, integrated with admin scheduling. All of these can be fluid and work together if you're planning for that and looking and finding the right things for that. And they are definitely out there. So you may also need to pivot to different things, different services, or you might find that the demographics have moved, the market's moved, or the reimbursement has moved, and you need to be able to, it's like who moved my cheese paradigm. You need to be able to pivot and adjust along the way. So you need to make sure that your software, your hardware, what you're purchasing and investing in is adaptable to those future needs. So what can you do now? That might be your question. Like, Jay, you're raising lots of red flags and concerns, and as I usually do, I want to provide both the concerns and the solutions. So we want to raise your awareness, but also solve those problems. So you can really, some of the benefits now of a telehealth program and infrastructure by applying them to your operations. Begin experimenting with technology for internal operations in limited ways with limited people. And we're going to talk about people in a minute, where you can start deploying these as pilot projects. Early on, I told you that we like to recommend pilot projects. Why do a pilot project when we know we're going to go this direction? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Nobody gets fired for a pilot. Everybody likes a pilot because it feels safe. We're kind of covering our rear. We're saying, hey, it's successful. Good thing we did a pilot. And if it's not successful, we say, hey, good thing we did a pilot. So that's a way to kind of acclimate people to change over time without causing major disruption. When you do a pilot, you're basically telling everybody this is experimental. It might fail. Don't shoot us if it doesn't work out right. Give us lessons learned. Give us feedback, and then you can do basically more pilots along the same lines until you perfect the process, and then you announce once everybody's comfortable with it that it's become a permanent thing. After it's kind of old news. That way, it's less disruptive to your organization. I'll give you a good example of this. I did a consulting project where I was asked to come help an organization that had previous 8 different grants for telehealth, 8 different grants. And I was thinking, why do they need me if they already had 8 years of programming and technology and consultation, and they must be like, maybe they should be teaching me what to do. But when I got there, I learned that they had no current telehealth program. And there were several people that had come and gone and tried to make programs work, and they just could never make it stick in their program. So what I did is did some investigation. I'm a counselor. I started collecting information everywhere and learned several different lessons learned from them. But one of them was that the leadership really never adopted it. They put it off to a kind of a one-off. They had a one department, one person kind of leading that. It was very much isolated. So the management said they're big believers. They want to do this. They want it to be organization wide. So I started having meetings with them online, even though I was local. And they said, why don't we just all meet in the same room? And I said, I would rather you all go to your own desks. This is pre-pandemic. And I had them all log in from their desks to video. And over the course of 6 or 8 meetings, they all became kind of accommodating and acculturated, habituated to doing this online. And they all said, hey, we should do this more often. I don't have to drive in early for meetings. I can just do this from home. And I said, yes. And so basically they started operationally using video internally, and the management and everyone got used to doing it to where it was just no big deal anymore. And that increased the level of trust across the organization. And lo and behold, a lot of the programs that were shelved came to life quickly. So when you're thinking about your infrastructure and what you need, a very big part of this is your people. So if you're focused again on technology only, you're going to be missing what really works, because it is the mindset of your staff. So we want to talk about that a little bit more. So when I talk about company, it's actually a euphemism for management. Okay, so we need management to be good at change. We need management to be good at change, and that mindset, if we get our management to think about being good at change, that reflects upon the technology purchases and leases that we buy and what we build. So whatever, if they get good at change, they're going to be anticipating change. And that means the decision making about what to buy will include those options and those integrations, and that what can we do with this in the future, that future opportunity, futuristic view. That way we won't be buying one thing that gets old quickly. I remember when telehealth was young in the market, there were a lot of big grants that went out, and lots of hospitals bought these very big video screens with really large cameras on them. And they were all proprietary. They could only connect to each other. I won't name the brand name, but they could only connect to each other. And it was really great for that one vendor. And they were helping people write grants, and it was kind of a machine. to make money for them. But now there's this hospitals have closets that have these machines that they don't use anymore. These big screen TVs that they're not even repurposing for other purposes. Now we can use our phone, we can use our laptop or iPad. It wasn't so much that we needed this big video system. We needed something more flexible, and to use the money for things that are more flexible and adaptable over time. So we want to make sure that our investments don't get stale quickly. But that really starts with a mindset of the management. So we want them to think about, how do I get good at change? So if you think about the investments to make now, I would say you should be investing in your people. You should be investing in design thinking, in project management skills, and change management skills, creating feedback loops and continuous improvement cycles, because those are the skill sets that you're going to need after you buy the technology. And before and after you buy the technology, this is going to be the thing that makes your program work, because every telehealth program is different. There's some similarities among all of them, but about maybe 10 to 20% of it is always different and always very, very local. And what happens if people get hung up on little obstacles instead of going through a change management process and project managing it and getting feedback from different stakeholders? How do we make this work? Telehealth works, but you have to work it. You have to make it fit your circumstances. So that comes from these soft skills. And that's where I think the most important investments should be made, is in the people for those projects. Also in experimenting with the technology, buying smaller units and buying things and making programs, experimenting, getting feedback, going through these change management processes. You can think about it this way. All of these are needed in your company now, no matter what, right? So it's a good investment no matter what. And you can apply these skills to something else in your program as a warm-up to get started for that. If you think about this in other ways, there are, well, let me back up and say, what this will do is give your management, your leadership, kind of a paradigm and a little bit more freedom to think about. Telehealth is not a kind of a one and done. It's a process, and digital health itself is a continuously moving target. Now, it doesn't move like rapidly, but it well, it depends on what you think about rapid. It does move, and there's slight adjustments as over time. So, the first website that ever came out about 30 years ago, a couple days ago, was the 30th anniversary of the first website. And it looked kind of clunky and ugly. And now they're pretty slick and cool looking. There's a lot that's changed over 30 years. And there'll be a lot of change over the next 30 years. And by the way, your technology won't last 30 years no matter what you do, because they keep iterating and keep getting better at this. But what these soft skills will do is make your service a well-oiled machine. It will be the fundamental currency that makes it successful. So this will help your leadership be more flexible in their thinking about what will work. It'll open them up to experiments and what's new and doing therapy in new ways. It'll also open up your clinical staff to think more creatively on how they can accomplish the same fundamental services in new ways. And it'll prepare your staff for this idea of change coming and being comfortable with change in general. It'll also inspire them and encourage them to take small risks and learn lessons. So that's pretty imperative. There are lots of ways that programs fail, and we're just going to touch on this quickly. But I want you to understand that the technology itself is not what works. It really is the execution of the technology, and that's why I'm advocating hard for staff investments. So there is this cool, innovative company that came out with some really awesome technology that already. It's a household name, I'll say in a minute. And they came out with a very cool 2 different devices, and they were way ahead of their time. People really loved them that use them, but they failed twice to deploy this, and they failed in execution. So it was it was the couple of products that that we're seeing as really cool and really innovative, but it wasn't the coolness of them that made it work. It was their process. The product is GoPro and Hero. GoPro had a reputation for those innovative products, and they even anticipated high demand, and they got everybody excited about it. But then when they released it, it was a very bad experience. They weren't ready, and they had to recall a lot of their products, and it really dampened their excitement. Their revenue declined by 40%, and they lost over $100 million. So it was really the execution of the cool technology that was imperative. Same thing. There's another well-known name, big company, airline company, that wanted to get into the low-cost airlines, and a big part of that market was already taken by like JetBlue and Sprint and others, Spirit and others. So they wanted to get, this is a really big airline, they wanted to get involved in it too. So they created the airline, but they didn't roll it out very well. They didn't announce it, and they didn't put any money really into the market. The airline was called TED, TED. It was created by United Airlines, and it failed. And they dished out over $2 million when it launched, but nobody knew that it existed, and there's no really incentive to choose it. So they had to close it pretty quickly. It flopped. So we don't want your telehealth program to be like that. It's not the technology. It's all the things around it. It's your whole staff being excited and ready and interested and engaged in it, and being part of the process of learning as they go and innovating in a more agile process. So speaking of staff, and I will say we are getting to the technology part as well, but thinking of the staff, you need to think about a few different roles that need development. You need a clinical champion. And so all four of these people should get versed in these kind of paradigms of design thinking, of change management, of project management, feedback loops, and innovative iteration. So this is your clinical staff. You want to pick 1 or 2 clinical staff, maybe 3 at the most, that are part of this team of contributors, where they're trying the technology on, they're brainstorming, they're thinking, they're part of that plan development, and then plan trials and experimentation, and then plan feedback. So you have your clinical staff, you have your admin staff. We usually forget about them, but they are usually the people actually doing the logistics of this. They're the boots on the ground. They're the ones that talk to the patients when no one else is around, and the patients ask them, should I really do this? You don't want them to give the sour face and go, I wouldn't do that. You want to have them say, yes, it's great. I've tried it myself. It's pretty cool. You want your staff engaged and part of that solution. And this takes some planning and good management. So you need your management champion, at least one manager, to kind of give political cover and give them the space and the funds to make sure that they have the time to do this planning and trial work. You don't want to add this as a part-time job on top of a full-time job. They got to give them a little bit of room to do this work. But you need your management staff, and then you need a tech champion. This could be somebody internal or somebody that's external, outsourced. But it's part of this team of people that are weighing in on what's needed. So this is all before you buy anything. You need these champions, and they need to be familiar and comfortable with this change management process, because if they are thinking more that waterfall approach, where you're deciding everything in great detail up front, and then you execute once and then you're done, if they are stuck in that paradigm, you're going to have a lot of friction when you're trying to pivot, or you're trying to innovate, or you're trying to experiment along the way. So everybody needs to be on board with this being a fluid process that's going to iterate and evolve over time from their feedback and from data from the experimentation process. So that's what works overall. You also need you may not have the staff, so you need to be identifying staff maybe within your company first, if you're a larger organization, or recruiting people that already know agile processes or can learn them quickly, or nurture the talent to give them the education that they need. Think about Chick-fil-A, for instance. I don't know about you, but I'm not aware of a better chicken sandwich than Chick-fil-A. I don't own stock, no disclosures here. But what really impresses me about Chick-fil-A is not their sandwiches, although they do impress me. What impresses me is their operations. If you go to any Chick-fil-A across the country, you will find a well-oiled machine. So is it the chicken sandwich that makes them pretty great? Well, if without these operations, they would have long lines and angry customers. And people would have more of a sour taste about it, and some would just not go there anymore, and the revenue would plummet. But they have spent quite a lot of time and money in experimenting with their processes, gathering feedback, and continuously innovating. And with the pandemic, they've done a really good job of innovating their drive-through services. So this is a model for investing in your people, growing them over time, and adjusting to the market. So if you take that and apply it to your technology, you don't want your technology to get in the way of that innovation. And so you need technology that's flexible enough to go with that flow and be adaptable to be able to pivot to new things and in new ways. So we'll talk about more of that in just a minute. You also need to be able to duplicate your talent, because sometimes a telehealth program will fail when one person leaves the company. That's what happened in one of the consultations I went, where they had, again, multiple years of telehealth grants and funding, but they have all their eggs in one basket. So you don't want all your information to go into one person. You want a team of people to be working on this so that the knowledge, organizational knowledge, doesn't leave quickly. You should also, because of time, I'm going to work a little bit more quickly, but you'll have all these slides for you. You want to use an agile approach to this, and I put a couple slides here about agile approach. Another investment you need to make now is in HIPAA compliance. I can tell you with almost certainty that your current HIPAA security is outdated. Why? Because you should be looking at this quarterly and reevaluating what you have. You should be adding new policies and procedures every time you have any kind of new service or any kind of new vendor. And it's likely you had several new vendors over the last year, and you need to have signed a brand new updated business associate agreement with every vendor every year. And definitely with every new vendor that comes by and has any access to your electronic protected health information. So what's on the screen is a little rainbow that shows you kind of a process. HIPAA compliance is not a one and done. It's an operational expense, obviously, but also it's a procedure that you keep reviewing and reviewing. It should be part of your daily operations. And ongoing training of staff at least monthly and annually to have a more formal training of all staff in HIPAA. That's actually required. So I put just a quick cheat sheet of all the documentation that you're supposed to be doing every year. In bold, I put required, so that you're familiar with maybe what you're not doing. And if you want to contact me on the matrc.org website. We have a lot of resources there that are free to you, or you can contact me for a roadmap of how to get HIPAA compliant. But I would highly suggest that you get your staff to be really knowledgeable about HIPAA, because that is kind of the foundation for digital services. And if you start looking around, the more you learn about HIPAA, the more you'll understand how shallow a education most providers have. It's not something they teach in graduate schools. And so we usually read a little bit about it. We think that's enough. Handing out privacy policies, that's actually not enough. There's quite a lot more you need to do, because one of the number one threats to your company now is digital hacking and to your vendors. So you need to be vetting your vendors. And you need to know HIPAA to know that your vendors are doing what's HIPAA compliant. Most vendors will put a symbol like this one on the screen, which is only marketing. That's not a real symbol. It's a symbol that I made up that I put on here to give that sense of, hey, this is HIPAA secure. But from our last webinar, you'll learn that there's no such thing as a HIPAA symbol from the government. There's no certification. So you need to know enough about HIPAA to know that your vendors are doing this. So before you just see something on a website that says, oh, they're HIPAA compliant, and just trust that, you need to know that your vendors may not have enough knowledge either. And you're at risk from that, even though they're at risk with you. So it's important that you know how to vet your vendors. And so I would invest in HIPAA compliance knowledge for you and your staff pretty quickly. You also want to prepare, obviously, with codes and examples of codes. And we've talked about this in other webinars, but I just put a slide up here for your information if you haven't seen that yet. But some of the services that are now available for reimbursement are like Tele-IOP and Tele-MAT, so intensive patient hospitalization, right? And Tele-MAT, medication assisted therapy. Also substance abuse treatment, individual and group treatment. DWI services are in every state, they're required. Anger management, court referred services are required. They're being reimbursed and even endorsed by judges and courts across the country. Peer support, messaging, case management. A lot of these are being chronic care management for mentally ill. These are all being reimbursed now and are slated to be increasing over time as people are really buying into the idea that these are scalable and they are reimbursable and they are highly effective. So preparing your technology, as you invest, you need to do a little deep dive into what you have now. And it's important that your organization get a really good grip on what you have and cataloging it to know what you're going to need. So from that, I would say it's really important to have technology. Here's some attributes on that. Some technology that's available everywhere care happens. So that means in the patient home, that means on a boat, on a plane, that means wherever the patient is located. We do not need to require our patients to come into the office. That's a paradigm that's outdated. Now we prefer that because as clinicians, we like to see people in person, but there's no clinical reason for most of our services to be in person anymore. Now that's a paradigm shift for a lot of people. But what you can do is start operationally shifting to accommodate these as part of your normal workflows so that a certain mix of your services is always online, maybe a line of service or how those are deployed. Maybe you have some staff that are always remote or they're remote on certain days of the week. And in order to accommodate growth, you can have many different providers access services from their home if they have created a clinically appropriate environment. And we have other trainings on that. So your infrastructure needs to accommodate care anywhere, both the provider providing the care and the patient or clients receiving the care. So your technology needs to be able to accommodate that. It also needs to be highly reliable, and I would say even duplicated in some cases. You need to be open to integration with other software. If your patient data can't flow to other places, if you're selecting technology that is so locked down, it won't flow to other software, that's a big problem because that's really going to limit you on your future. So you need to check that whatever you're selecting, it has an API, which is application protocol interface, I think, or program interface. So an API where you can port the data out of their system into other systems because you need that flexibility as your services change or as you want to pivot or as you change your mind about something, you need to make sure that you are able to move that data out. There are several vendors that are now kind of proprietary locking you into their systems. And I would say you don't want to reward that. You want to reward those softwares that are interoperable, as the federal government is really pushing us all to become more interoperable. And we're expecting kind of another meaningful use incentive program if things are not interoperable in the next few years. So you need to be preparing for interoperability as the government is, again, pushing very hard on that. That could be done, again, through API or something called FHIR or FHIR. And those standards are basically languages of how softwares talk to each other. But you want to make sure that what you're choosing is able to do that. It also obviously needs to be easier to use and easy to upgrade and not expensive to upgrade. You also need to be able to customize things to flex with your program needs. So you don't want the software, the hardware to force you into doing certain things. You want to be able to tell it what to do. And then again, of course, you want very low maintenance costs. So internet usage, as I mentioned earlier, is 93% of all Americans are now using the internet, and most of those are using smartphones. This is from a Pew Research study in 2019. So this is, pre-pandemic. And so what we're looking at is people are using the internet now, and this is even those that don't have broadband. So one of the questions we'll talk about in a minute is broadband. We'll come back to that. But your hardware, you need to be looking at what hardware needs that you have now. What do you have? Take stock of all that you have. Take an inventory, as you're supposed to for HIPAA compliance anyway. Take an inventory of all your hardware and all your software, the versions. Are they up to date? Are they able to scale, or are they too old to upgrade? Sometimes we have older technology that's just too old to be updated to new versions of the software. And then that creates a lot of limitations on what you're able to do. So you want to map out your capabilities and your limits and create remote control systems for the potential of BYOD, or bring your own device. So you can basically use your systems, and with some software, you're able to have other people connect to your secure systems, validate who they are with different security permissions, and not have to invest in a lot of extra hardware. So it could be that some of the investments that you thought you needed, you don't need to budget for, because you're going to pivot and use software for a lot of that. But through those remote control systems, the basic minimum requirements you're going to need are for any unit is a camera, internet connection, keyboard, a video card, and a screen. It needs to be, I would say, something within the last 2 years. The older it gets, the less likely you can integrate with other programs, or less usable it'll be to handle new video systems. But make a roadmap and think about this, that most experts recommend that you should replace your machines every 3 to 5 years, your computers. Again, personal devices are being used, and in the pandemic, they've been used quite widely and successful in telemental health. There are some standards and trainings that you're going to want to put in place for that, but something that's very feasible now. So you don't need to invest in lots of laptops per se, or you might, depending on your paradigm or how you want to roll out your services. But your clients are able to see see you from home with their smart devices. So I would plan for that in the future, as a lot of people prefer seeing people from home. Your software that you're going to invest in, you need to be thinking about, again, the future. You don't want to be locked into long contracts. You want to be short-term contracts that are flexible. It's vital that you have software that was made for telehealth, because it'll have a lot more of that security and those elegant workflows that make it operations less expensive. So if you go cheap on your software, you're always going expensive on your manual labor. So you really want your programs to, you really want to eliminate all the manual labor you can get away with. So this is your registrations, your scheduling, your sending links, all of that. None of that needs to be manual. All of it can be done through software that's HIPAA secure. So you need to be thinking about that and accommodating that, and thinking that's where we're going in the future, and planning that into your budgets. And then, the people, you don't need to fire them or lay them off. You just redeploy them into higher positions where you do need interaction with people, more customer service and the hand-holding that makes it all work. You also want to make sure there's no interruptions in your workflow, no bottlenecks, no one point of failure. And so all of this, again, can be done through these new investments that you're going to be making. Make sure that whatever you select has a lot of reporting and analytics capabilities, and integrates with your EHR, your prescription software, and reimbursement. You also want good documentation of whatever you're selecting. Also, one thing that's often overlooked is language. There are softwares that are available in multiple languages. So you need to shop for the software that can accommodate different language needs that you have, and help your area. In some states, they're requiring that you provide language services, and that doesn't mean they need an interpreter. You can have actually software connect to interpreters through a HIPAA secure system also, but you can have the software itself be presented into Spanish, German, or Urdu or Hindi, because of the populations around you need those services in those languages. This helps them connect to the right people in the right place through their own heart language. We talked about interoperability, and this could be a whole webinar on interoperability. Well, the one thing that you need to know is that the word is kind of like HIPAA or contract. It only means what people tell say it means. It only means what people add to it. So interoperability is supposed to mean that the data can flow back and forth, but we find that when they use that, it's kind of like a placeholder that says, hey, talk to me about integration. Because there's always a little bit of manual work that's needed to be done to make things interoperable. It just means that the company's open to that for the most part. So just know that there's always a little bit to do there, because all the softwares have little nuances and differences, even though they say they're interoperable. Biometric data is big now, and on the screen you see, we have fingerprint and facial recognition, but this is increasingly going to be used in treatment and assessments. So you need to be taking on the mindset that you're going to be integrating this at some point. The first kind of thing you can use right now is using it for logins or security validations to get to that HIPAA secure data and get into your software. But later on, we're going to be using it more for behavioral health treatment and assessment. So stay tuned, that's rapidly growing and coming in another webinar. You also want to prepare your data. Your current data needs to be in a state where you can transfer it back and forth and be interoperable. So you need to make sure that all the fields, all the data are not jumbled in one field. Like your address, is it in one field, or is it the address street is in one line, city is in one line, state is in a different field, zip code is a different field. All those make the data easier to port to another place. So as you think about moving your current data into new systems, you need to think about, is it parsable right now? And some of that can be done with a programmer can make that happen. But it will take some work and costs that you'll need a budget to make sure that your current systems can be updated into new systems. And then are you ready to integrate, right? What's the state of your data? And make sure that you can do that efficiently and effectively, but somebody needs to assess what's your current state. Then you need to think about the user experience, and this is kind of part of that software and hardware decision. You might have the idea now what you want and the idea later. What we can tell you for sure is that patients, clients, they want a patient portal. They want a way to connect with you electronically. They don't want a phone call in every time. There's a certain percentage, a smaller percentage now. My view, probably 20% of people still like to make a phone call. But the majority of your clients want to go in and just self-schedule or send a quick message or send their records to your registration online. So if you're mailing out data packages or mailing out packages for them to fill out, hand, and bring into the office, all of that can be done online and saves you a ton of work and drastically reduces your costs. So there's a very high ROI on changing to this user experience where a lot of this is done by the patient. And a good user experience. Oh, I was also going to mention some of the softwares out there used for customer service are not HIPAA compliant. So that's something that you need to look at. What's a HIPAA compliant support system where you can do customer support through technology? It's probably not going to be your website, because your website, if it's WordPress or wasn't made to be HIPAA compliant, is likely or definitely not HIPAA compliant if it wasn't made to be that way. You also need to be thinking about your workflows and what are the requirements that your technology will need for your workflows. This is hard to predict for me, to tell you, give you advice, but what I would recommend is thinking that almost all your manual work will be automated in the future. So you can think about that, how efficiently we can make that through design thinking. And then you develop, of course, your SOPs and things like that. But those SOPs and workflows of both now and later will help you make those technology decisions. There's a lot of people talk about bandwidth, and as we're closing in on the end of our webinar here, I need to just bring up a fact that it's recommended that you have broadband everywhere, and that definitely does help with internet connection, but it's actually not required, especially for mental and behavioral health. You're not using an otoscope, you're not using other devices at this point. We prefer that you have broadband access, but you can do telemental health on a regular internet line or on your cell phone with cell service. Now you want to make sure you're not paying a lot of minutes for that, but you can do this over Wi-Fi. You can do this on a regular cable modem that you're doing it, not on dial-up. Unfortunately, that's not around anymore. But we've done mental health sessions down to 300 to 500 KB. Optimal is 3 megabytes upload, 3 megabytes download, and you can do a speed test and find out what yours is. But with good software that's made for telemental health, you can get pretty low on the totem pole. So you don't have to wait until you get broadband to start your services. You can start them now for those that do have the access, and then start scaling over time as other people get better access and better broadband over time. But it really depends on your scope and type of services. You do need to invest in technical support and training. Some of this can be outsourced, but I highly recommend that you be training your staff. And then, of course, you need to be thinking about how you're going to scale your design, your program over time, how you're going to include other offsite resources and other offsite clients and administrative staff to grow and to pivot and to be ready for the next pandemic. You need a flexible infrastructure. So you might be thinking, do I buy my own servers? Do I buy my own hardware for that? I would say that since things are rapidly changing, I would recommend leasing your technology infrastructure, going with the cloud, HIPAA secure cloud service, because the infrastructure really changes quickly, and those technical resources needed are very, very expensive. So there's a really good return on investment for investing in cloud services. I'm going to have to wrap up because we're at the end of our time, but I wanted you to be aware that we have free technical assistance for you at matrc.org. Every other Friday, I'm online answering lots of questions. It's free. So there's a link to it on the middle of our homepage at matrc.org. And thank you for attending, and I hope to see you next week.
Right, Jay, thank you so much again. If you could please advance to the QR code slide. Thank you. So we didn't have any questions this afternoon, but again, if you'd like to contact us, please feel free, and I can send the email over to Jay. I'll put my email in the chat box. So what you see on your screen is our QR code. If you could please take your mobile device and hover over using your QR code reader, you can access our short evaluation survey. We are funded through SAMHSA, and as part of receiving this funding, we are required to submit data related to the quality of this event, and this is how we obtain feedback. I also, in the chat box, I also entered our Skipper link, which is the same evaluation link. So if that's easier for you, you can access our survey that way. I will also email this link as well after this, with the conclusion of this webinar. So next week, Jay will be with us again next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 to 1, for our final webinar in this series, right, Jay?
Yes, and we're going to be talking about lessons learned along the way, and give you kind of another layer of information to get you acclimated and ready to start services. So come back next week.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jay, and thank you everyone again for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye, everyone.